Christ is risen.
Truly he is risen.
Today is the feast day of St. James the Apostle, sometimes referred to as St. James the Greater to differentiate himself from St. James the son of Alphaeus. St. James, whose feast we celebrate today, was the son of Zebedee, making him the brother of St. John the theologian. St. James, we know from the gospel accounts, was one of the first of the 12 apostles to follow our Lord. He, together with his brother John and Peter, were fishing when Christ came to them, and at once, it says, they laid down their nets, they left their father, and they followed our Lord. Here we see one of the marks of the apostles, one of the things that differentiated them from us, from so many others. There was no hesitation. There was no planning. That the moment that they encountered our Lord and he revealed himself to them, all was left. Family ties were cut, business nets themselves were laid aside. There was no, wait, Lord, let me go tell my father. Peter, we know, was married. Doesn't even say he goes and tells his wife. He follows Christ. They didn't say, okay, let me sell my nets, make a little money so that if things don't work out, I have something to fall back on. Such faith, such trust in our Lord was truly a mark of St. James. As faithful as he was early in the ministry of our Lord, he didn't understand what it meant that our Lord was the Christ, the Messiah. And the gospel, according to Mark, he and his brother John go to our Lord and say to him that they wish to be enthroned, one on his left and one on his right. And our Lord asked them, are you able to drink of the cup that I drink? In the Doxastikon of yesterday's Vespers, we hear that St. James, whose feast is today, was the first of the apostles to be martyred. One of the first to follow our Lord and one of the first to follow our Lord in death. He truly drank of our Lord's cup. Going on in the story, the life of St. James, we hear or see an example of perhaps one of the reasons why he was called the Son of Thunder. He was, together with his brother John, willing to call fire from heaven to consume the villages that rejected their Lord. And yet Christ interceded for these villages. In one of the hymns today, we hear that St. James was given the gift of compassion by our Lord. St. James was one of the 3 apostles who beheld our Lord in his glory on Mount Tabor. After Pentecost, we hear very little of him in the scriptures, and yet tradition tells us, or at least one tradition tells us, that he went to Spain. And there in Spain, he preached the gospel, the good news of the death and resurrection of our Lord. Some disagree with this. There's another tradition that say, no, this isn't the case, because in the book of Acts, it also says that Paul desired to go to Spain, that he wouldn't build on the foundation of one of the other apostles, seeming to imply that no one had yet been there. The confusion perhaps can be made sense of because we do know for a fact that in later years, the relics of St. John, or the relics of St. Iacobus, James, were brought from Jerusalem to Spain. And there, to this day, he is considered the patron. And in fact, his church that houses his relics is in all of Western Europe, the most visited place by pilgrims. And so whether he was actually there or simply miracles flowing from his tomb that's there in Spain, he is beloved there. The tradition that tells us that he was in Spain says that our Panagia appeared to him and told him to go and complete his course to return to Jerusalem. And there he went and he preached. And he was finally betrayed by a man who tradition tells us was named Josiah. Josiah, after betraying James and seeing the grace and the wisdom that was within this apostle, this hearer and follower of our Lord, Josiah repented. And he himself joined St. James in martyrdom. St. James, some say by the order of Herod, others say by his very hand, was beheaded. And yet, this was not an event that was tragic. It was a joyous event. When we read about the martyrdom of St. James, as we do with St. Stephen, we see a man who is at complete peace, a man who is trembling with the hope and the joy of the resurrection, one who, like St. Thomas, beheld the risen Lord, had said, "My Lord and my God," who knew in the depths of his being that our Christ is risen. The final thing that I would like to say about St. James is to see him at his beginning and his end, and the power of our Lord's light to transfigure his life. He was this zealous son of thunder who was ready to rain fire down from heaven upon those who disagreed with his Lord. And yet, tradition tells us that the final words to be uttered by St. James before he was beheaded, words offered to the one who betrayed him as well as to those who sought his life. The Son of Thunder said, "Peace be with you all." And so the Son of Thunder became like a gentle rain that follows the thunder so often, that gives life and joy to the world. May Christ our God be with you through the prayers of the Holy Apostle James.